Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome back to Podcastage. A couple of weeks ago, Universal Audio announced the Hemisphere plugin, which gives their standard line of microphones a little bit of modeling functionality. Of their standard microphones, the only one that I have to test is the SD-1. If you want a full review of this microphone, I did that about a year ago. I'll link that in the description. I also want to disclose I bought this with my own money. Universal Audio is not paying me to make this video. I am making this because I'm curious how the plugin sounds. With that out of the way, let's check out the plugin, let's see how it works, and more importantly, let's hear how it sounds. This is the plugin from UA that's going to give you all of the microphone models for the SD-1. First, let me go ahead and turn on the plugin. Up until now, you've been hearing the raw SD-1 audio. Now you are hearing an emulation of the DN7, and if you want to learn more about the microphone that's being modeled or understand what the filter, proximity, or axis dials are doing, you can click on the information button and read a little bit more. I'll click out of the information, and now let's look at the controls. First, we have a phase invert switch, so in case you have any kind of phase cancellation, you're able to invert the polarity. Then we have the filters, and this will be different for each microphone. Currently, I have it set to off. Going to 1, this gives me the low cut on the SM7. Going to 2, we have the presence boost on. And third, we have the high pass filter or low cut and the presence boost. Let's go ahead and shut that back off. Then we have the proximity effect compensation dial. So if you want to make the microphone sound a bit closer to the individual in post-production, you can increase the proximity effect. If they're a bit too close to the microphone, you can go ahead and reduce the proximity effect. It is pretty straightforward and easy to understand. It is basically an EQ, but if somebody moved around in between takes, this is a nice tool to have. Then we have the axis dial, and this will also be different from microphone to microphone. As we learned in the information, when it is set to 0 degrees, this mimics the SM7 with the windscreen, but if we go to 180, now this mimics the SM7 without the windscreen. So another really nice feature to have. And as you saw at the start of this walkthrough, you have a power switch so you can turn on or off the emulation. Currently, the emulation is turned off. Now I have the emulation turned on. The last control that we have is an output fader, so in case you want to attenuate the signal at all, you can go ahead and bring this down up to -12 dB, or if you want to boost it, you can go ahead and boost it by 12 decibels. Now let's walk through all of the emulations that this plugin offers for the UA SD-1 dynamic microphone. Currently, you are hearing the raw audio. Now I have engaged the emulations, and we are using the DN7, which is an SM7 model. If we click the right-hand arrow, let's jump to the next mic. Now we are on the DN20 or the RE20. I do not have any of the filters engaged. Now I have filter 1 engaged, I have filter 2 engaged, and now I have filter 3 engaged. Let's go ahead and shut that off. Let's go to axis 90 degrees, and then axis 180 degrees, jumping back to 0 degrees. That is the RE20 emulation. Now we are on the RB77DX Satin emulation, and here is how it's sounding with no filters. Now I have the 100 Hz filter engaged. Here is what it sounds like on V1. Here is how it sounds on V2. Let's go ahead and shut the filters off. Here is how it sounds with the axis set to 90 degrees and the axis set to 180 degrees. That is how this SD-1 sounds, mimicking a ribbon mic. Now you're hearing the DN88 emulation, which is mimicking the Beyerdynamic M88. As they mention in the information, this is Phil Collins' microphone. Filters are off. Let's go to the first one, 60 Hz. We'll go up to 100 Hz, and then we have 200 Hz. Let's shut the filters off. This is the axis at 0 degrees, the axis at 90 degrees, this is 90 degrees, axis at 180 degrees, and back to 0. The last microphone emulation that we have is the DN441 or the Sennheiser MD441U. Filters are off, axis 0. Let's go to the first one. This is brilliant, so I imagine this is mimicking the high shelf on the 441. Jumping up to the second filter, which is listed as S2. This is the S2 filter. And then we have S3. This is S3 filter. How does this sound? Let's go ahead and shut this back off. No filters engaged. This is how it sounds at 0 degrees. Jumping up to 90 degrees, this is 90 degrees. And then this is the 441 at 180 degrees. Jumping and turning it off. Clicking the right arrow one more time, we are back on the DN7 or the SM7B emulation. Here is how the raw SD-1 sounds. This is the raw microphone's audio quality, and here's how it sounds on the SM7B or the SM7. Now let's jump to some mic comparisons to hear how close these mic models get to the actual thing. Obviously, the first microphone that we need to compare is the SM7B, so currently I have the SD-1 set to the DN7 mode. That is clearly emulating the SM7B. This is how it's been sounding. Jumping over to the actual SM7B, I have it in flat mode, no presence boost, no bass cut. Both mics running through the UA-X8 interface. Jumping back to the SD-1, this is the SM7B, or as they call it, the DN7 emulation, and then jumping over to the Shure SM7B. That should be enough to let you hear if there is a difference in tone or if the SD-1 gets close to it. Now I am back on the SD-1, but I have changed the emulation to the DN20. If you look at the image, it is obviously emulating the RE20, which I just switched to. This is the RE20, no high-pass filter engaged, and here is how it's sounding. Jumping back to the Universal Audio SD-1, mimicking the DN20, or the RE20 rather, that's that. And then ending on the RE20 so you can hear how the actual thing sounds. Did it get close or is it really far away? Back on the SD-1, but I have changed the emulation to the DN88. This is clearly trying to mimic the Beyerdynamic M88, which is what you are now hearing. I believe this is the Phil Collins microphone. Jumping back over to the SD-1, this is the SD-1 mimicking the M88. And here is the actual M88. Does it sound the same? Does it sound different? Let me know. That's enough of that comparison. And the last comparison we're going to do is the SD-1 running the DN441 emulation. This is obviously mimicking the Sennheiser MD441, which is what you are now hearing. I have the high pass filter disengaged. I have the high shelf or high boost disengaged, and here is how the actual microphone sounds. Jumping back to the emulation, here is what Universal Audio's interpretation of the 441 sounds like. That should be enough to give you a feel for how it sounds. And here is another sample on the actual Sennheiser MD441U, which costs over $1,000 now. A lot of money. There you go. Those are the comparisons of the dynamics that the SD-1 emulates that I actually have, so that you can hear how close it gets to the real deal. So how do the models for the SD-1 compare to the real deals? Maybe I have the wrong versions of the microphones that they're modeling, but to my ears, I don't think they sounded too similar. I think every single one was quite a bit different from the actual microphone that it's supposedly modeling. Now, that's not me saying that the plugin sounds bad or that each of these EQ profiles makes the microphone sound better or worse. I am just saying that with the microphones that I have, the real deals, I don't think it gets too close. So if you're looking at this expecting to get an SM7B, an RE20, an M88, a 441, and a vintage ribbon microphone, I wouldn't expect that. Just expect to get the SD-1 and then have a few different characters to play with in your recordings. I also want to preemptively answer a couple of questions that I know I'll receive. First, do you need a Universal Audio interface to use this plugin? The answer is no. The SD-1, the SC-1, and the SP-1 are all analog microphones. You can connect those mics to any audio interface, and this plugin just drops into a channel on your DAW, and that is how you get it. So you can use this with any audio interface. And secondly, does this plugin work in real time so that you can live process a microphone for a stream or some kind of live performance? No, but kind of. This is a plugin, so it needs some kind of host software to run in. That means that you're going to be routing your audio from the microphone into an interface, then into another piece of software. Then that audio is going to get processed by this plugin, and then you need to output that audio to wherever you want it to go. That is going to add latency. So you do not get zero latency monitoring. You do not get this in real time. It is going to have a latency to it. And third, can you download the Hemisphere plugin and use it if you don't have one of Universal Audio's standard microphones? No. In order to download this plugin, you need to register your standard microphone with the serial number. And you better hope that you still have the box, because the 6 digits in the XLR port, that's not the full thing. So no, if you do not have a standard microphone, you cannot download and you cannot use this plugin. So what are my final thoughts about the Hemisphere plugin? The first thing that I want to say is I can only assess it based on the performance with the SD-1 because I have not tried the SC-1 or the SP-1. But when it comes to the models, I didn't find them to be too accurate to the actual microphones that I have. As I mentioned, maybe I have the wrong versions, maybe they're basing these models off of some classic vintage versions of those mics, but if you're looking at the SD-1 with this plugin expecting to get the modern versions of the SM7B, RE20, M88, etc., it's not going to give you that. What it does seem to offer, though, is a really easy way to play around with a few different characters of microphone in post-production to see what works best in a full mix. So if that's what you're looking for and that's what you're expecting, I think this is a really nice upgrade to the standard line of microphones, but I don't really think that the plugin is enough to get me to go out and buy every single one of these microphones based solely on that functionality. I still think if you're buying one of these microphones, you ought to be buying it because you like the sound of the microphone on its own, first and foremost. That is it. I know this is different. I don't typically do follow-up videos, but this plugin was too interesting to pass by. Let me know in the comments if you like this type of video, and I'll try to do more in the future. But if you found this fun, interesting, or helpful, go to give me a thumbs up. Hated it, big ol' thumbs down. These people make videos like this possible by supporting the channel at $5 or more. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you so much for listening. Talk to you next week. Bye-bye. Whoa, whoa.